contractor and the client in large construction projects. So essentially here we're talking about a transition from relational to technological trust, and we will see how the Internet of Things and blockchain technology, hello. And so we will see how the Internet of Things and blockchain technology are able to have an influence in this process. So this is based on secondary and primary research. The primary research was based on 10 one-to-one interviews. We segmented them so we could cover the life cycle of a project. We interviewed members of contracting team, client team, and technology experts. So from contracting team, we interviewed managers and directors from construction companies like Bouygues, like Maze, like Vinci, or Cobra Group. From the client team, we interviewed engineers, architects, investors, and consultants. And from technology experts, well, members of construction consortiums, blockchain researchers, CTOs, IoT researchers. So we'll have a look at some of the construction industry complexities. We'll have a focus on supply chain. Then we'll move on to talk about trust and how it is built in this context. Then we'll have a look at what the Internet of Things is and blockchain, and we'll see how they can fit in the trust-building process between a contractor and a client. So in terms of construction industry complexity for large construction projects, these are mainly infrastructure projects that were analyzed, as well as civil engineering projects. They are highly complex because many players come into play here. There's complex flows of materials, information, and capital taking place. So in a high-end perspective, we can think of something like this, where three main players come into play in terms of client, main contractor, and subcontractors. These are three big blocks, let's say. They're not obviously all of the players coming into play. There are documental flows from the client to the main contractor in terms of requirements and contracts. They also flow to the subcontractors. Those are the other requirements and contracts they sign together. There's capital flows from the client to the main contractor until the end of the tires in the supply chain. There's material flows from subcontractors to main contractors. And these material flows are particularly important for civil engineering projects because they account for over 70% of their total cost. So they should be managed accordingly. Now, the problem with this is a very simple picture, but in practice, it's going to look a bit more like this. We have these big blocks with their own ecosystem around them. We have many stakeholders coming here into play, which they share their own informational flows, capital, and materials. This adds a new layer of complexity to our context. The problem here is that the client has little visibility of what's going on in the whole supply chain. It is very difficult to keep track of all of these transactions. Documents might get lost, and materials don't get accounted for. This also leaves a gap for opportunistic behavior and mistrust. So in this context, it is imperative to build trust between the players to enable information sharing to flow smoothly throughout the supply chain. So this trust is especially key for the construction, for large construction projects, and it's something that is valued by the client. So we have a look at what trust is really. So trust has been analyzed in many different contexts, and it's something that is being analyzed more and more in construction. So when we talk about trust, we need to distinguish between interpersonal and interfirm. Interpersonal trust is the trust built between two individuals, while interfirm trust is the collective perception of trust between members of one organization towards the members of another organization. In the construction industry, interpersonal trust is very linked to interfirm trust. So both have to be considered. Now, we based a lot of our research in what Liu did in 2015. His conclusions were that the competencies, reliability, and goodwill of a contractor are the main factors affecting trust from the client's point of view. Here we have some of the research that we gathered as well from primary research, as well as that research from Liu. So the working history that a contractor has with its client is something important pre-bidding. It's something that increases the chances to be invited to a bid, but it gives no guarantee of being awarded a project. Throughout the front end of a project, once the bidding phase is taking place, the competencies that a contractor has in terms of their skills and abilities, that professional experience they built through years, those references they bring from previous projects, and we also found that innovative capabilities is something that is increasingly valued for the client at the front end. It's something that they make them have more confidence that the contractor would deliver a successful project. Throughout the contract development, reliability is the main factor that builds trust. This is an institutional factor that is based on contracts. These contracts, we found out they have to be open and flexible to allow the client to change things throughout the design and build phase. Now, dispute resolution mechanisms are an increasingly important thing to build trust with the client in this phase. This is a way to avoid entering into expensive litigation throughout the construction phase. Now, if we move on to the last phase, in the construction phase, it's key to build goodwill, according to Liu. The goodwill of two parties is the way they share information, they interact together, they communicate, and the way they get involved in the whole phase of the life cycle of the project, right? We also found that meeting contractual requirements and quality standards is something valued by the client. And it's something they want to have a tight control on. And nowadays, it is very difficult to have it if they don't have certain, let's say, technologies, apart from just progress reports that may be weekly or monthly. They need to have a real-time visibility of all of the supply chain, especially for these informational, material, and documental flows. Now, let's have a look at what the Internet of Things is and what blockchain technology are, and then we can see the fit with these factors. So the Internet of Things. I'm sure most of you came across the Internet of Things somehow. It is basically a cyber-physical system that denotes the convergence of the physical and the digital world. It is about sensors. It is about physical world becoming digitalized. And the revolution of the Internet of Things is that sensors can communicate between them. They can automate data management. They can make data go from the sensor to a specific database you can choose from. The problem with the Internet of Things nowadays is the device heterogeneity there is, the amount of data they produce, and the vulnerability they have to cyber attacks. This is why we thought about blockchain to solve these sort of vulnerabilities. In this area, we had the chance to interview the head of the partnerships and indirect channels at Opgenius. It is a subsidiary of Bouygues Telecom. So basically, what they do is implement IoT projects in construction. And he was telling me how this is becoming something increasingly important for clients and something that can deliver trust to them. Because the data that is being gathered from materials, let's say you can gather the data in terms of temperature fluctuations, humidity, pH, or stress. This can be gathered from the point they get extracted up until the point they arrive on site. This allows the client to have visibility of these material flows, and as we said, they account for a big budget of the project. So it's something that the client needs to have some sort of control over. Now, as we said, the vulnerabilities are based on cybersecurity problems and massive amount of data being produced. This is where we thought about blockchain. So blockchain is a technology that has harnessed the potential of distributed ledger technologies. It is a way to store data in a distributed manner. Instead of having just one roof to store data, like could be a cloud, you're replicating this data so every node of the ecosystem can have access to this data. Of course, we need to differentiate between public and private blockchains. In this specific presentation, we were focusing more on private blockchains since they're more fitted for IoT ecosystems, especially for the increased throughput of transactions and the level of privacy given to participants. That is actually really interesting because if you were using a public blockchain that anyone can participate and anyone can have the access to data, then it might create some problems for IoT ecosystems, especially for construction projects, because the client might not like to enable certain tiers in the supply chain to have access to all of this data. So it's something that is quite malleable in that sense. So the way blockchain stores data is in blocks. So when monetary or non-monetary transactions enter the block, cryptography is used to chain the blocks together. Essentially, a cryptographic hash is created for each individual block, and they contain their own individual hash plus the hash of their predecessor block, which essentially could be seen as the glue or the chain between the blocks. This essentially enables this technology to be immutable and tamper-proof. So it avoids opportunistic behavior from part of the contractor team to modify this information, so the client can trust this data. Now, we also need to talk about what the consensus protocol is. This is the way to add and verify the transactions to the blockchain. We can talk about many different types of consensus protocols here, and each time there's more and more, each time they get better and better. But the point here, especially for private blockchains applied to IoT ecosystems in the construction supply chain, we need to balance the security of this consensus protocol and its efficiency. We can talk more about later in the questions if you want to go more in detail in consensus protocols, but the whole point would be to allocate a team from contractor side and client side that they can work together in these transactions. We need to note that obviously these technologies are very novel. They need special departments and they need high capital investments to implement them in an efficient way. But it's something that can deliver the client more supply chain visibility and be able to secure all of this data gathered from the IoT in a secure way. So the synergies between the IoT and blockchain are the following. The data that you're gathered in an automated manner from sensors has security. It cannot be modifiable. This creates transparency for the supply chain members. All of these players that come into play, if they have the access rights to enter and see the blockchain data, they will be transparent between each other. It also enables a better supply chain visibility for the client, especially for material management. This also allows stakeholders to work together. It involves the client more in the whole process. Quality management could be automated as well. It could help to monitor how these properties of materials change throughout the process, since they're extracted until they arrive on site. So this would also allow for dispute resolution mechanisms, which we saw, it's something that also allows clients to build trust with their contractors. This is because if you can track the origin and provenance from all of these materials, then you can see when they got damaged. If they arrive on site and they're damaged, you can track back to the point where they might have fluctuated at 90% the humidity levels, for example. So it gives you a high chance of allocating responsibility to some of these parties. Now, let's see how these factors can fit in the trust building process. Now, as we can see here, we have modified this framework, and we see that technological capabilities have some kind of influence in all of the project life cycles. So at the front end, it allows differentiation through innovation. It allows contractors to basically sell themselves better with clients and improve their skills and abilities. It enables them to enhance their competencies, to provide new things, and to provide new supply chain visibility. Throughout the contract development, we talked about dispute resolution. This is mainly based on quality management for materials. We also analyze how it can affect on-site worker performance by being able to track who is using wearables, who is resting, and who is working. This is also a mechanism to track energy cost on-site. This helps to resolve disputes and avoids entering into expensive litigation. And according to our research, this is something valued by the client. Now, if we move on to the construction phase, here's where we can find the most value from these technologies. They can enable for a transparent flow of information between these players. It allows to collaborate more between the supply chain. Hence, it allows the client to be more involved in the project. These are the three main factors that contribute to build trust in the construction phase. We also found that contract monitoring, being able to monitor what is being delivered in the contract, is something that the client needs and wants to have. It's something that it's difficult to provide, and due to this opportunistic behavior, and also quality management and improved decision-making can be enacted. This is because gathering all of this data allows for analytics to take place. Then the client is able to use this data, which is, by the way, understandable. It's not just raw data. It's something that is transferred to information. So the client can actually read it, understand it, and improve its decision-making. So essentially, these technologies can have an influence on building trust at the front end of a project, during the contract development, and during the construction phase. We need to, again, note that these technologies are novel. They need some time to mature, and they need to adapt to the resistance to change from clients, and they're limited for construction companies that have the capital investment to implement them, of course. But after talking to all of these experts, and especially the leader of the IoT ecosystem in France, the Opgenius we were talking before, we learned how more and more clients are interested in these technologies. So if this transition becomes more and more ingrained in the industry, then we can reach a point in which trust is not only built at a relational level, but also technologies can play a part in this. Thank you very much.